So I was going to go straight into a video about tropes and postmodernism, but as of recording this, I'm still pregnant and still kind of in a brain fog, so I kind of want to hold off on that one because it's a little bit more in depth. And also, in light of recent events, mainly Brandon Sanderson getting his media deal, I realized I should probably address that sooner than later, and that's a really easy one to talk about, honestly, which is the effect that Hollywood has on the publishing industry, and why this movie, TV show, whatever it is not actually a good thing for Brandon Sanderson. Now, I'm not a crystal ball, obviously. I can't tell the future. I don't know how well or bad it's going to go, but there are a few things of note that tell me it's not going to push this into the same heights that other things have gone. And here's the reality, is I did that video about the success of authors, especially in the past, and their lasting power, and I get comments like, well, what about Shakespeare, or Charles Dickens, or Jane Austen, let's say, right? Well, Shakespeare is kind of its own thing. It was definitely more propaganda for Queen Elizabeth and the Tudor reign. And the revival of Shakespeare is its own historical interest, but it kind of has similar beats to what I'm about to talk about, which is Charles Dickens and Jane Austen are only as big as they are because of Hollywood. In the early days of Hollywood, the golden era of Hollywood, when they were making all these silent films and then the talkies and finally color films, they would pull extensively from literature, especially free domain literature, to make their movies. And on the same token, they would also take bestsellers of the time and make movies. Now, because these movies are really good and considered classics, and they put a lot of thought and effort and new mediums and whatever, I mean, there's people who can talk about Hollywood better than I can. I'm only pseudo-versed in it. They are now classical movies, classical content, and the books that they were based off of are still in print. Best example of this is Gone with the Wind. It was a runaway bestseller in the 30s, but that movie is why we still talk about it to this day. Wizard of Oz, same thing. Two prime examples of those were books, they were big, yes, but they were made bigger by their movies. And so Jane Austen and Charles Dickens are two really great examples of they were not really being as widely read at the time. Jane Austen in particular, like, she had some success, but she was definitely not on level of Charles Dickens. And yes, Charles Dickens was hugely popular, but the world had mostly moved on at that point. You're talking post-World War I. No one really wanted to read about the workhouse. There's also one other thing about Charles Dickens of note, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But when they were making their movies, they pulled all this old literature that still technically had printed copies somewhere, especially because they were so popular to an extent, and said, oh, this will make a good movie. And Jane Austen does. I think Pride and Prejudice does make a really good movie. It might be sacrilegious to say, but I think the BBC adaptation is better than reading the book. And Charles Dickens is the same way, because, let's face it, how many of you have actually read Charles Dickens? Outside of what you had to read in school. I know for me personally, I've read A Christmas Carol and A Tale of Two Cities. I've tried Oliver Twist and I've tried Great Expectations. I get bored. It is so boring. You can see how he was paid by the word. Yes, that was great back in the day because it was serialized. Best example I can think of is like some manga that we read today, you know, where you see the serialization. Have you ever tried reading a manga series when it's fully published? You start to see the problems. I recently reread Death Note, and yeah, that has issues, and that's shorter than most, right? So serialization does hurt longevity. But Hollywood picks it up, takes out all the fluff, makes a good movie off of it, especially the 1960s Oliver musical. And suddenly, Charles Dickens is back in the public eye, and everybody is reading him, and he's a classic who needs to be read in school and dissected and whatever. The other thing about Charles Dickens, which is not related to Hollywood, but kind of similar, I don't think he would have been remembered if it wasn't for A Christmas Carol. I think his other books were fine, they were popular, but there are plenty of pulp, Penny Dreadful-esque things that were super duper popular. As I said, when I read that New York Times bestseller list, how many of those books do you remember? How many of the authors do you remember? Some of them even got movie deals, okay? Yeah, you fade in after a while. But Charles Dickens did something with The Christmas Carol, which is his shortest book. It's a novella. It redefined Christmas. And that's why he still has a cultural impact. Not the other stuff. A Christmas Carol. Period. Okay? So when you say, oh, but he was popular, yes, he was. But it's not his popularity that kept him in the public zeitgeist. It was this one little short thing that he did that everyone reads at Christmas time and then makes a shit ton of movies of, some of them really good, some of them really bad. Okay? It is the quintessential Christmas story, kind of like Home Alone. And I bring up Home Alone because this is tied to why J.K. Rowling also blew up. And yes, she was big. She was definitely big. That's why she got her movie deal eventually. But she became bigger after the Harry Potter movies came out. The first two, specifically. Not the rest. The rest were just... Or at that point, everyone was involved with Harry Potter. Like, there was no stopping that gravy train, essentially. No. The first two movies of Harry Potter, The Sorcerer's Stone and The Chamber of Secrets, were directed by Chris Columbus, the same director of Home Alone. If you've seen Home Alone, or Home Alone 2, you've seen Harry Potter, and you've seen, I'm forgetting, he's done a couple other movies like that. These are instant classics. They are just such perfect movies that really get us in the mood and get us excited and evoke a lot of emotions, because movies do that, I think, more so than books. Books, you have to kind of figure it out for yourself to an extent. There's a lot of imagination that is involved in reading. But movies, it's just a visual, and if it's a visual masterpiece, you will relate to it fairly quickly. And The Sorcerer's Stone in particular is a visual masterpiece. It is, for the most part, well acted. The kids are a little iffy, but they're still kids, right? But the adults are really good. So many memorable things. It is a quintessential children's movie. We just recently watched it with our kids, and they loved it. And I went to the Chamber of Secrets and I went, oh my god, this story is so stupid. But the movie itself is just a perfect kids movie where you could take your kids and go see it and the adults can enjoy it, because Chris Columbus has always been good at that. That's what Home Alone is too. And you watch it year in and year out. I mean, it's been, 35 years since Home Alone came out? It's crazy that people still relate to it as much as they do. It's the same with the Harry Potter movies. And once you had that in of, hey, let's go to the Harry Potter movies. Oh, by the way, did you know it's a book series? No. Did you know there's 4 books out? Yeah, let's go read it. We want to know what happens next while we wait for the next movie. And it's telling, because that series died with the last movie. And I know what you're going to say. I will do a dedicated Harry Potter video at some point, and I will go over all of this. But trust me when I say Harry Potter blew up because of those movies more than anything else. And another one is also Stephen King. I know, Brandon Sanderson, Stephen King, right? He owes so much of his career to Stanley Kubrick and The Shining movie, which he hates. And there's a little part of me that wonders if he hates it because he knows he owes everything to that movie. Yes, Carrie got made into a movie before that. Yes, he's had a lot of success. I'm not saying he hasn't. But the lasting power of Stephen King comes from The Shining movie. We still talk about The Shining movie, and to a certain extent, like the It TV show and maybe the movies, for other reasons, but they wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the Shining movie. Hollywood has this effect because it draws more people in, and people go, oh my gosh, this was great. Wait, there's a book? I'll go read the book. Cool, fine. Or if you're not inclined to read the book, I won't, but now there's money that's been made because there's a movie. Movies make money more so than books. Yeah, we know that. So, used to be you kind of wanted that media deal. You really wanted that media deal. You still do, to a certain extent. Because that media deal, if it was done well, like it was done with Harry Potter, like it was done with The Shining, like it was done with Gone with the Wind, could solidify you, at least up until the 21st century, as more than just your run-of-the-mill author. But it's not always the case. As we see with Valley of the Dolls, while that is has a cult following, the book and the movie, it's certainly not as big as The Shining or Harry Potter is. But once upon a time, that was the biggest thing ever. And actually, I think the book was bigger than the movie to an extent. So yes, there is flukes, there is stuff like that. But overall, we now don't really talk about Valley of the Dolls as much as we still talk about The Shining, we still talk about Harry Potter, right? Problem is obviously, even other channels have talked about this, what the heck is going on in Hollywood today? People are not enthralled, people are pissed, people hate the casting choices, people don't like the movies that are coming out. If they do base it off a book, it's diminishing returns and the books don't necessarily sell. So you'll see things like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this because someone's comment got deleted when I said, but like the Netflix adaptations of all these Wattpad authors, one and done, whatever, you're seeing a lot of that. And there are also because they'll pick up like these fantasy series that are overly long. Yeah, I know. They'll make them into TV shows, which they did with Game of Thrones, right? Except I'm going to posit that Game of Thrones ruined it for the rest of us, or ruined it entirely. I think it was ruined before that, but Game of Thrones really ruined this concept because it was, hey, maybe we can turn books into TV shows, which they had done before for like Dresden Files and other longer series, make a TV show out of it. And there was success, although I don't hear people talking about Dresden Files anymore. We're still talking about Game of Thrones, but only because, well, that ending, and someday we will talk about George R. R. Martin as well. Brandon Sanderson, though, he held out for too long. Because at this juncture, even though he went with Apple, and I know people have said Apple is doing a pretty good job, unlike, let's say, Amazon, which nobody wants to talk about anymore. Or people talk about it a lot, so I'm not going to get into it. Apple, yeah, it's okay. But I don't really know a lot of people who have an Apple subscription, and there's also just the problem of like there are too many subscriptions, so the chances of a lot of people seeing these things, unless they're put into theaters, but even then people aren't going to theaters. Yeah, you can start to see where it's like, okay, just semantics or the logistics of all this, it may not actually be in his favor. The way The Shining blew up, everyone went to see that, everyone still watches that. I don't know how we all can collectively go see a Brandon Sanderson adaptation at this point. And people have talked about that, of the splintering of our culture in a sense. And I pseudo agree with that. But this is a good example of, yeah, that's what happens. It's you have to have an Apple subscription, right? Or you have to go to the theaters if they put it out in the theaters even. And then there's the other part of this, which is they gave Brandon Sanderson a lot of creative control. More so than any other author has ever had in the past. Especially Stephen King, because he hates The Shining. As we have discussed, Brandon Sanderson really freaking needs an editor. Like, really, 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 really needs an editor. And I don't know if he's going to be able to produce. Writing scripts is not the same as writing books, especially when you tend to word vomit the way he seems to do, right? They're also adapting Mistborn. That makes sense. Mistborn would be the first one you have to do. I know there was a Polygon article that was like, oh, we shouldn't do Mistborn. Yeah, then what should they do? Mistborn is it. If Mistborn is not successful, this whole endeavor falls apart. You do realize that, right? The complaints that that article had with Mistborn were like, yeah, that's the point. It's not that good, is it? Right? If you're pointing it out like, oh, maybe it won't make a good movie. Did it make a good book? Yeah, exactly. It's got its issues. The idea would be that this movie or TV show or whatever it ends up being could be edited and some of those things fixed. My prime example of this is a series of unfortunate events, which, by the way, I love the books. I will always love the books of that. The TV show and movie did try to fix some of the problems that happened because he serialized it. And for the most part, if you kind of like read the books and watch the TV show of a series of unfortunate events, you get the complete story. And so I advocate for that if you want to really enjoy it properly, as I would say. And that's what Daniel Handler could do, Lemony Snicket could do. He could use the TV show to correct mistakes. That's what Brandon Sanderson kind of needs to do with the Mistborn movie. Is he going to do that? Well, his track record isn't all that great, is it? And yeah, he held out for complete creative control, and I get why he did that. I would do it too. But at the end of the day, I don't know if I would even sign on the dotted line at this point because of where Hollywood is at. It's not going to have the same impact that it has had in the past. And because of that, I don't know if Brandon Sanderson has the lasting power that the fans really want him to have. And I say that because this is all falling apart, this whole industry. So yes, he's very popular, but he is very, very niche at the end of the day. And not as many people know about him as you would expect, because when I was doing numbers again, I actually sat down and looked at Brandon Sanderson's numbers. And based off how many books he's written, he averages about 750,000 copies sold of each book. Now, I know Mistborn has sold like 10 million copies, so grain of salt here, right? Still, A Court of Thorns and Roses sold 13. While this movie and TV show should propel him into more numbers, I don't think it can. Not with the not with the industry the way it is today, and not with him having full creative control just because of who he is. He might be his own worst enemy here.